Hello everybody, I'm Chasing Lamely, otherwise known as Chris, and welcome to the first edition of Let's Talk F1 of 2021. And in today's episode, we are going to be predicting the 2021 Formula 1 season. Just a quick caveat so everyone's clear on how we're doing this. I'm going in reverse order of how I think the teams, the constructors, will finish from 10 to 1 in the Constructors' Championship, and we'll cover the drivers as we go. This is also a prediction, bearing in mind we don't know how the virus is going to affect the season. We don't know if we're going to get to see Hulk or any other drivers coming in. So it's just so we're very clear, this is the information we have now and the predictions based on that. Otherwise known as getting my excuses in early. So first up we have the Haas team with professional scumbag Nikita Mazepin and the son of the prodigal son, Mick Schumacher, making up 10th place on the grid in terms of where I think they'll finish constructors-wise. The reasoning behind this is I think the Haas team have gone backwards over the last few years. I think they've been being made good by having two quality, experienced drivers in the team who have been maybe carrying them with results a bit more than perhaps people have given Magnussen and Grosjean credit for. Mazepin, though he brings a lot of money with him, doesn't bring a lot of talent with him. He's not a bad driver by any stretch of the imagination. He's certainly not going to be among the worst drivers we've ever seen in F1, I don't think, except in terms of his incredibly toxic personality, of course. But his history shows that, especially if you look at his history in the junior formulae, his first season is always shaky, and his second season is where it starts to become semi-respectable on the track. And this is his first season. I think alongside him, you've got Mick Schumacher. Again, has a history of not having necessarily a great first season, but then has a really good second season. So I think my concern is it's too early for these two guys to make an impact. The car they're starting with isn't a great car. I don't think either of them have the experience to develop said car as the season goes on, which I think is a real concern. I think that's going to be a big drawback for the Haas team. So I'm predicting that Haas themselves will finish 10th, and I'm going to predict that Mazepin will finish 19th, and that Schumacher will finish 18th in the Drivers' Championship. Next up is the Williams team, my preferred team, but I don't think it's going to be a great season at Grove this year. I think 9th in the Constructors is probably a realistic goal for them. Despite the fact they've been struggling the last few years, the reason I've got them 9th is kind of a twofold thing. First of all, they've started showing some real promise, they've started showing some real results, they've finally got the funding they need. George Russell has shown himself a very competent driver and a very competent development driver. He can outdrive that car, but he also seems to know what he needs to do to improve the car, and he'll find the team at Grove are very willing and very receptive to listen to his ideas and implement them. So I think it's fairly safe for me to say that George Russell will finish 17th in the championship this year. I think he'll pick up points. I don't think the car is quite good enough yet, and won't be with the amount of development time and leverage they've got over the winter break to get to that next level, but I think he can pick up points this year. He's had some really good qualifying performances in 2020. I think 2021 will start to see him picking up some points in the Williams car. The downside for Williams is that alongside him is Nicholas Latifi. Now, Nicholas Latifi, despite being another example like Mazepin of a guy who has a father that will buy his way into F1 despite the son having incredibly little talent. I think it almost upsets me to see how little talent Latifi has. And I'm sure if he sees this, he'll get upset by me saying that, but the results on track bear it out. He's in a bad car, but the bad car doesn't excuse how badly he is driving, which is terribly. And I don't remember him. I mean, I've seen him come through the juniors. I don't remember ever seeing him have a truly remarkable standout season. I've never seen anything about Nicholas Latifi that tells me he's ever going to be good enough for F1, and he certainly isn't good enough for F1 yet. He is nailed on, dead certain to finish 20th, and I think the only thing that will stop him finishing 20th is if Nico Hülkenberg has to drive a racing point on Aston Martin again this season, at which point Latifi will finish 21st. He's just not good enough to be there. It's almost an embarrassment to the sport that he is there, and hopefully the Williams team won't need his dad's money going forward, or his dad will realise that nobody's going to buy an expensive coffee machine because they saw it going round last on the side of a Formula 1 car, and he'll be gone. I know that sounds super harsh. It's not that I'm not wanting the kid to do well. It's just that as adults we have to be realistic and know when to accept that you're not it, Chief. And Latifi is not it, Chief. So it's going to be a 9th place finish for Williams this season, and Latifi will finish bottom of however many drivers make the grid this season. Next up, in 8th place in the Constructors, we have the Alfa Romeo team. I think 15th and 16th for Raikkonen and Giovinazzi is probably a fair prediction. It's where they finished this season. I think Raikkonen may have lost it, and I don't think Giovinazzi is showing the potential that I think people first thought he had. And it feels like the team have kind of stalled a little bit in development, and I don't know if there is anything to be said for them in terms of moving forward this year. I certainly don't think they move backwards. You would have to question how much fun Raikkonen is having battling at the back with the also-rans. I think this might prove to be his last season in F1, because as much as he says he just gets paid to do his hobby and he cracks jokes about it, I think when you're a former world champion, it's embarrassing to be seen in a car that it's not at the back of the pack, it's not good enough to join the midfield yet, it's just on the track for reasons that, I mean, it's essentially there to develop drivers for Ferrari, and they're not even doing that at the moment. They're just there. And I think it's embarrassing for Raikkonen, and I think he'll probably walk away at the end of the season. I think also we might see the last of Giovinazzi in F1 this season, because unless he shows a really big improvement, I cannot see a reason why they would keep him around. He looked like he had some potential. He hasn't looked like he's had some potential for a while. He's looked like this is his level. So I think 15th and 16th is what we're going to say for the Alfa Romeos. Next up is the back of the midfield battle, which I think is the really interesting battle this season, and it's going to be the Alpha Tauri team. I'm really curious about the Alpha Tauri team this year, because they've looked like they've been developing a car at a pace. They've obviously picked up some wins and some podiums this season. They've looked like they are certainly getting to a point where they have to be in that conversation with the midfield battle. I think the reason I've got them as low as I have, I've got them 7th this year in the Constructors. The reason I've got them there is because as good as Pierre Gasly has proven himself to be, and Pierre Gasly is an exceptional driver, and this season I think for him is going to be a real make or break thing, because he's going to want to prove that he should be driving somewhere competitive. And if Red Bull don't want him, he has to be thinking, is there going to be a seat at Mercedes shop? Is there going to be a seat at McLaren or Alpine or elsewhere? Is there a competitive seat I can go into? Can I earn a shot at a competitive seat? He's going to have an eye on the Red Bull situation, hoping that either Sergio Perez doesn't work out or that Mercedes, for some reason, lose Hamilton because he decides to retire, at which point Verstappen comes on the market, on the table for someone to come in and take. And I think that he must be getting frustrated now, because he's better than the team he's driving for. He's good enough to be at the teams in the championship fight. And I think he's proving that again. And I don't know how things are going to work out there for him, but I think he's going to do everything he can to win as many points for AlphaTauri as he can while he's there. He's certainly capable. He may even pick up another podium or two this year. So I think a fairly fair idea of where he'll go. I think he'll probably finish 11th, is what I'm saying. As for Yuki Tsunoda, I've got him finishing 14th in the championship this year. The reason for that is Yuki Tsunoda is a very good driver. He's an incredibly good driver. He's shown it in the Junior Formula. He's shown it in Super Formula. He's a very, very good driver. He is an incredibly good driver. My big concern with Yuki Tsunoda is not talent. He's very quick. He's very, very quick. But my concern with him is the step up. I don't think it's too big a step up for him. I think he's not quite ready yet. And what I mean by that is, although he's got the talent and he's got the speed, and he certainly is good enough to be in Formula 1, and he may well be the best Japanese driver we've seen in years, if not ever, or prove himself to be, I'm worried about him physically. He's not a big guy. He's certainly not a small guy, I'm wrong, but he's I think he might lack the strength and endurance that is needed for F1. And he can certainly get himself there. He's certainly a good enough driver to get himself there. but it's going to take some time, and I don't think it's going to be this season, so I'm predicting him to finish 14th. I think he'll have some good showings. I think, presuming these races run, you can expect him to give some really good performances at Suzuka. You can expect him to perform really well at Monza. I'd expect him to do really well at Silverstone, but I don't think he's going to have that consistency just yet, and I think he's going to need some luck on his side. So I think 14th is probably a fair assessment of where it'll be. It will hold AlphaTauri back this year, but if they stick with him and he can have some good results, and it maybe encourages this relationship with Honda to continue in some way, shape or form, I think it'd be a really good boost to the team. I think he'll be a really good addition to Formula One as the years go on. But we're not there yet, and I think 14th is a pretty strong showing for a debut season. Next up, we're into the midfield battle, the real midfield battle proper. I think the AlphaTauri are in the battle. They're going to finish 7th in it. I think 6th, we're probably looking at the Alpine team, the former Renault team. The reason for this, again, is the question marks. The two question marks for me that will determine whether or not they finish higher or lower than where they are twofold. One is, can Esteban Ocon prove himself to be as good a driver as we thought he might become the first time we saw him in F1, where he looked like he was always up for a battle. He looked like he could be a really big talent going forward. Or will it be the Esteban Ocon we saw last season that was just phoning it in and felt a bit like he was riding on his reputation rather than trying to earn a bigger reputation? And that's the reason I've got him finishing 13th this year, because I don't know which Ocon we're going to get. Either we're going to get the guy who looks like he wants to be a world champion, or we're going to get the guy that looks like he's there to earn a paycheck and the prestige and just live the playboy life a little bit. Alonso I've got down as finishing 6th this season. I think Fernando Alonso, is undoubtedly one of the best drivers in the world. I don't think anyone would question that. The question marks for me are, how good a car will the Alpine Renault team put together this year? Can they improve it? Can he improve it? Does he still have that technical knowledge, that technical expertise to improve the car? The other issue I have is he's been out of F1 for a couple of years, and obviously he's been racing, which will help, but nothing prepares you for F1 like driving an F1 car, and he hasn't been doing that of late. If we can start seeing some glimpses of the old Alonso, and he's still got that technical expertise to offer, and he can help develop this team. We already saw towards the back end of last season, they were starting to get results. They're starting to develop. They look like they've got the beginnings of a championship-winning F1 team coming together. Are they there yet, is the question. And I think the other question is, would Alonso have gone there if he didn't think he could take what was already there and turn it into a championship-winning team? I think 6th is probably a fair reflection of where he'll finish. I think next season he'll go better, assuming he sticks around. But this season I expect a really slow start from Alonso, and then for him to just start racking up points like he's owed them. It's going to be a really interesting season for the Alpine team. Again, continuing the theme of the midfield being really tight, and I could have put 6th through 3rd in any order. Quite frankly, I really had to sit and think about this. There's been some bold decision making, and it's going to be the McLaren team, I think, finishing in 5th this year. The reason I have for this is that I'm not sure if this is going to be the season McLaren absolutely catch fire with the new engine, with their well-known expertise in building a chassis. It could be incredible. Their aero work, that engine could be an incredible combination. Danny Ricciardo, I've got him finishing 5th. I think Danny Ricciardo is the right car-engine combination away from being a world champion, and if this combination works together very well for him, he might find himself in the fight in the next couple of years. But I think he'll have a really good season this season. I just don't know if it's going to be a great season. And the reason I've got McLaren in 5th is because I'm a little bit worried about Lando Norris's consistency. I think 12th is somewhere around where he'll finish. Obviously he finished higher last season, but he also didn't have Alonso and others ahead of him to kind of water down that top 10. I don't think he's a bad driver. I don't think this is going to be a case of this will be his last season in F1. I don't think he's in any danger of leaving the sport at all. But what I do think will happen is that he might struggle to find that consistency. He'll struggle to find that rhythm. Ricciardo is going to demand a lot of attention from the garage to make sure he has that A1 car on the team. If there's going to be a preference of a new development part, it's going to go to Ricciardo's car first. So I think Lando will struggle. He's his consistency occasionally sees him drop points for stupid reasons. I think 12th is fair for him. I think Ricciardo finishing 5th with something to prove is definitely realistic, and I think McLaren finishing 5th is also a realistic way to look at things this year. Next up, I've got Ferrari finishing 4th in the Constructors this year. I think this is going to be a case of, and I feel weird saying this, I think it's going to be a case of consistency rather than quality. The only thing that Ferrari have had to work on over this sort of winter break has been improving the engine's power and improving the engine's reliability. They've been the two key things they've had to work on, and they've had to try and do it legally, which is going to be where they struggle because it's Ferrari, and when they have to play by the rules, they often struggle because they don't know how. But assuming they've managed to get their engine up to power and they've got their engine's reliability sorted, I think they're going to finish 4th in the Constructors this year. I think we'll see Charles Leclerc finishing 8th. I think we'll see Carlos Sainz Jr. finishing in 9th. They're both great drivers. They're both more than capable of outdriving the car. Leclerc proved that last year. Sainz, to a large extent, proved that last year as well. I just don't know if we're going to see it from the... We're not going to see him go beyond 4th or anything, but I think a solid 4th place finish with some good consistent runs is probably about the place they're going to end up. In 3rd place this year, I think the Aston Martin, formerly known as Racing Point, Force India, everything else. The Aston Martin team, I think, will finish 3rd this year. I think they'll get 3rd in the Constructors. I think the reason for this is twofold. I think Lance Stroll is a massively underrated driver, and I think of all the guys who are in the sport because of having a wealthy father, and obviously his dad owns the team, which helped, he's the one with the most quality as a driver. He has been an F4 and an F3 champion. He does know how to drive. There's no doubt, I think, in my mind at least, if some people seem to think he's another Latifi, he's not. The guy can drive, and he's proved it repeatedly. And I think the development cycle at the Racing Point / Aston Martin team has continued as it left off. I think 3rd is realistic. I also think that having Vettel in the team with him, an experienced head, good at developing cars, has spent time with Ferrari and Red Bull, brings that knowledge with him, combined with the Mercedes engine, and the fact that Sebastian Vettel has so much to prove this year. He has spent the last few years at Ferrari with a car that wasn't good enough for anything. It was a worthless machine he's had under him for the most part whilst he's been at Ferrari. And the questions are starting to surface about whether or not he's a 4-time world champion because of Red Bull or because of his talent. And I think he's going to want to prove it's because of his talent. I think we're going to see a fire lit under Vettel this year that we haven't seen lit under a driver in the last decade or two. This is a guy with a lot to prove. He's got a car that is, in theory, among the fastest on the grid. Even if it is a pink Mercedes, or a green Mercedes this year, I guess. It will be among the fastest on the grid. It will be a very good car. I think Sebastian Vettel is a guy who can take that car and turn some results. I have only got him finishing 7th in the championship, and I think the reason for that is because there is a consistency issue, and also because we know the McLaren team can be strong, which puts Ricciardo ahead of him. Just on pure pace consistency, the McLaren team is very good at building a consistent car, and if you give them a consistent engine, they will score points consistently. And Alpine with Alonso's just too good a driver to ignore, and we know that car is going to be good. So I've got Vettel finishing in 7th. However, everything from 7th to 4th in the drivers for me is a toss-up. It could be any one of 4 drivers in any order. I think getting that, and maybe even Charles Leclerc can get himself squeezed in there as well. I've got Lance Stroll finishing 10th. I think this is because he's going to very much have to settle into a role as a number 2 driver behind Vettel. I also think as time progresses, especially once Vettel maybe starts to call it a day or moves on or whatever happens, Stroll is going to prove to be a very good number 1 driver, and I think he can afford, he's still quite young, he can afford to wait his turn, learn his craft, and just put in better and better results. And I think he's going to be the guy who goes on and gets results going forward for the Aston Martin team. I also think going towards the end of the season there's going to be a question whether Aston Martin will stay with Mercedes or whether they will develop their own engine. They have a good sports car program. We know they can develop a decent power unit. That could come into play, and that's going to feed us nicely into the Red Bull team. And so that brings us to the top 2 teams. And I think second place in this year's Constructors is going to go to Red Bull again. But I think it's going to be a lot closer than it was last year. It'll be closer in 2021 than it was in 2020. I think the reason for that is going to be that in Verstappen and Perez, they've both got two incredibly good drivers who are very capable of massively outperforming the machine they've been given, and the machine they've been given is incredibly good. It's not the best machine on the grid, but I don't think it's far behind the best machine on the grid, and I think when you take Verstappen and Perez's ability to outdrive that car, they're going to get results. I think Verstappen will finish second in the championship this year. I think Perez will finish third in the championship this year. I think they're going to have a really good battle between them, and it could go either way. You could find that Perez pulls a surprise and upsets Verstappen more than once. But I think it'll be enough to get them to second easily in the Constructors. The reason I said that, talking of Red Bull part with Aston Martin, was obviously Aston Martin and Red Bull have had a partnership over the last couple of years. They've been the Aston Martin Red Bull team. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility, with Honda talking about pulling out of the sport, Aston probably not wanting long-term to be driving with a Mercedes engine, and Mercedes having to supply now five teams? I think it's 4 teams in the F1 World Championship going forward. I think Mercedes are going to be stretched to their limit of how many power units they can produce. There's also talk they want to get out of F1. I think Aston can produce an engine that is competitive in F1. Honda probably won't stick around, and may not even stick around long enough to develop an in-house engine with Red Bull. I think Red Bull might be looking beyond this season at having an Aston Martin engine in both the senior team and, of course, the Alpha Tauri team. Just a little sidebar to look out for. I think there's going to be news we get coming out at some point during the season. But without hanging around, let's talk about this year's almost certain champions. And this year's champions, of course, constructors and drivers will almost certainly be the Mercedes team. I think there's nothing to stop Lewis Hamilton winning an 8th World Championship. There's no driver on the grid that's good enough to stop him in that car from winning it. I think the only question mark over their season is going to be how well will Valtteri Bottas perform, because he's under so much pressure. He will drive for the team this season, obviously. I think he's only going to finish 4th in the Drivers' Championship, and I think that's because he isn't as good as Perez and Verstappen are in terms of relative quality of driving skill to relative quality of car. I think he's good enough to be the rear gunner in the Mercedes team. I don't think he can outdrive the Mercedes car. I think Lewis can outdrive the Mercedes car. And I think that's going to be where the trouble lies. I think if Bottas can't finish in the top 3 this season, he'll be gone from Mercedes. At which point we have that interesting conversation of, well, how does the Mercedes merry-go-round work? Will it be George Russell comes up into that seat behind Lewis? Do they want 2 British drivers? Do they want George Russell to come up and learn how to be a number 2 driver behind Lewis, or learn from Lewis? That's certainly a possibility going into 2022. I think there's also an argument that maybe George Russell isn't quite ready yet, at which point I think we'll probably see a deal done with the Aston Martin team if they're going to stay under the Mercedes banner, or with the McLaren team, depending on what happens there. We'll either see Ricciardo or Vettel move up into that seat. Obviously Lewis hanging around dependent. I think we'll see Valtteri Bottas in 22 driving for the Williams team, and I think we'll see George Russell driving for whoever ends up being the de facto Mercedes B team. Whether that ends up being McLaren or ends up being Aston Martin is up in the air, dependent on all the things I've already discussed. But that's pretty much where I think things are going to shake out. We're going to do a quick rundown now, just so you can see it all in front of you. Leave me comments below. Let me know what you think is going to happen, because I think this could go either way. I genuinely think this could be an either way situation. There's so many ways this could go. Everyone will have their opinion, their predictions. Let me know your predictions below, and at the end of the season we'll go through it. We'll go back through the whole thing and we'll see if I was close or right, or one of you was right, or, we'll see. So let's get into the final standings that I think is what we're going to see this year. So looking at the final Drivers' Championship standings, I think it's fairly safe to say that we're going to see Latifi finishing 20th, then Mazepin, Schumacher, Russell, Giovinazzi, Raikkonen, Tsunoda, Ocon, Norris and Gasly is the bottom half of the field. We'll then see Stroll in 10th, Sainz in 9th, Leclerc in 8th, Vettel 7th, Alonso 6th, Ricciardo 5th, Bottas 4th, Perez 3rd, Verstappen in 2nd, and Hamilton winning the championship for the 8th time. I think those are pretty nailed on. But we'll also look at the Constructors' Championship. And in the Constructors, I think we're going to see Haas finishing bottom, as I've already said, followed by Williams, Alfa Romeo, Alfa Tauri, Alpine, McLaren, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Red Bull and Mercedes. So those are my predictions for the F1 2021 season. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe to stick around for the channel, where you'll get more sports talk happening, including F1 talk from me and others. If you want to leave me a comment below telling me what you think, whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, do that. That's always a good idea. And we'll come back with more F1 news as the season progresses. And of course, we'll follow this video up in December to see how things shook out. But in the meantime, guys, thank you for watching. This has been Let's Talk F1. And until next time, have a good one.